My name is Eleanor Vance, and for as long as I can remember, I have been in love with the city of Chicago. I am 31 years old, and I did not just choose to live here. I was born here, raised on stories of the Great Fire and the steel that rose from the ashes. My father was a construction worker who helped build the skyscrapers that pierced the clouds, and my mother was a history teacher who taught me that a city is more than just concrete and glass. It is a living, breathing thing with a heart and a soul. I took their lessons to heart and became an urban planner and architect of spaces, not just buildings. My job at one of Chicago's top firms was not just a career, it was my way of adding my own verse to the city's epic poem. I specialized in community revitalization projects, taking neglected corners of the city and breathing new life into them. I loved the challenge, the puzzle of balancing history with modernity, of creating parks and public spaces where people could connect. My world was one of blueprints, budget meetings, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint scent of printing paper. I was good at my job, respected by my peers, and I believed I was on the cusp of something truly great. My life was ordered, satisfying, and filled with a sense of purpose. I was exactly where I wanted to be until Clarice arrived. Clarice was our new logistics coordinator. She was not a planner or an architect. She was the person who handled the flow of resources, the booking of rooms, the ordering of supplies, and the scheduling of interdepartmental meetings. On paper, her job was to make our lives easier. In reality, she was a storm cloud that had drifted into our otherwise sunny office. From the very first day, there was a friction between us that I could not explain. When I introduced myself with a warm smile and an outstretched hand, she gave me a look that could curdle milk. Her handshake was limp, her eyes were cold, and she said nothing, just gave a slight nod. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe she was just having a bad day or was nervous about starting a new job. But the coldness never thawed. It seemed to be reserved especially for me. When I would pass her in the hallway and say good morning, she would stare straight ahead as if I were invisible. When I would ask for a simple file, she would sigh heavily as if I had just asked her to move a mountain. I talked to some of my other colleagues about it, trying to see if I was just imagining things. Marcus from the Information Technology Department confirmed it. He said he had the same feeling. He told me Clarice had a way of making you feel like your request was the single biggest inconvenience in her entire life. It was not just her attitude, it was the way she wielded her minor authority like a weapon. Every decision I made, every request I submitted, she would question it. Why do you need the large conference room, Eleanor? The small one should be sufficient. Are you sure about this supplier, Eleanor? I have heard they can be unreliable. It was constant, a slow drip of negativity and doubt that began to erode my confidence. She was a gatekeeper who seemed to enjoy making people jump through hoops for no reason other than her own satisfaction. My current project was the biggest of my career, the Riverfront Revitalization Project. It was my baby, a massive undertaking to transform a derelict industrial stretch along the Chicago River into a vibrant public park with walking trails, art installations, and community gardens. It was a project that could define my career and make a lasting impact on the city I loved. It required seamless coordination, perfect logistics, and a team that worked together like a well-oiled machine. And at the center of that machine was Clarice, a wrench waiting to be thrown into the gears. The problem was clear. I had a nemesis who seemed dedicated to making my professional life as difficult as possible, and she was standing directly in the way of my dream project. My satisfaction with my perfect life was gone, replaced by constant low-grade anxiety every time I had to interact with her. Something had to give, and I was afraid it was going to be me. The first real sign of trouble came during the initial planning phase of the Riverfront project. We needed highly detailed historical survey maps of the area, which were stored in the city's archives. It was a simple logistical task for Clarice: just fill out a form and schedule a courier. I sent her the request via email with all the necessary details clearly spelled out. A week went by and the maps did not arrive. I gently followed up. Clarice's email response was short and sharp: I am handling it. Another week passed. Now our surveying team was on hold, unable to start their work. The project was already falling behind schedule. I went to her desk in person, trying to be as polite as possible. Clarice, I said, trying to keep my voice even, we really need those maps. Our surveyors are waiting. She did not even look up from her computer screen. They are on their way, she mumbled. I knew she was lying. I could feel it. I spent that afternoon making calls myself directly to the city archives. The clerk there was very helpful. She informed me that no request had ever been filed from our firm for those specific maps. My blood ran cold. Clarice had not just been slow, she had done nothing at all. I had to scramble, filling out the paperwork myself and paying for an emergency courier out of my own pocket just to get the project back on track. I worked the entire weekend to make up for the lost time. When I confronted Clarice about it on Monday, she just shrugged. Oh, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, it must have gotten lost in my inbox. My mistake. There was no apology, no remorse, just a cold indifference that infuriated me. I considered going to our boss, Mr. Harrison, but what would I say? My logistics coordinator forgot to send an email. It sounded petty, childish. I thought I could handle it myself. I would just be more vigilant. I would double check all of my requests with her. But that was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to spend my time and energy managing her when I should have been managing my project. The next hurdle was a meeting with a major potential donor, a wealthy philanthropist who was considering a seven-figure contribution to the project. This meeting was critical. I had spent weeks preparing my presentation. I asked Clarice to book the main boardroom, our most impressive meeting space with a state-of-the-art projection system. I confirmed with her 3 times in writing. The day of the meeting, I arrived early to set up only to find the boardroom was occupied. A different department was having a team-building lunch in there. I found Clarice at her desk. "Clarice," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of panic and rage, "what is happening? You were supposed to book the boardroom for my donor meeting." She looked at me with that same blank expression. "There was a conflict," she said calmly. "I had to move you. You are in conference room C." Conference room C was a small, windowless room in the basement, nicknamed the dungeon by the staff. It had a flickering fluorescent light and an ancient projector that was notorious for malfunctioning. My heart sank. There was no time to argue. The donor was arriving in 10 minutes. I rushed down to the dungeon and tried to get the projector to work. It would not connect to my laptop. The screen just showed a blue void. My donor, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, arrived to find me frantically trying to plug and unplug cables, a sheen of sweat on my forehead. The presentation was a disaster. I had to huddle with her over my small laptop screen, trying to convey the grand vision of the riverfront project on a tiny display. She was polite, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. We did not get the donation. The reason cited was that the project did not seem to have the full support of the firm's infrastructure. It was a devastating blow not just to the project's budget, but to my morale. I knew who was to blame. I tried talking to her again, this time more forcefully. "Clarice, this cannot happen again," I said, my voice low and serious. "Your mistakes are costing us dearly." She finally looked at me, a flicker of something malevolent in her eyes. "They are not mistakes, Eleanor," she said softly. "They are logistical reprioritizations. Maybe if your project was more organized, these things would not happen." She was blaming me. She was actively sabotaging my work and then twisting it to make it look like my fault. Stress was becoming unbearable. I was losing sleep, my passion for my work being replaced by a constant sense of dread. I felt isolated and powerless. The low point, the moment I felt like all was truly lost, came a few weeks later. We had a crucial progress meeting for the Riverfront project with Mr. Harrison and the entire senior leadership team. This was my chance to show them that despite the setbacks, we were still moving forward. I had worked tirelessly to get things back on schedule. I had my presentation ready, my data was solid, my designs were inspiring. I was ready. The meeting was in the main boardroom. This time I had booked it myself and confirmed it a dozen times. As I began my presentation, I could feel the positive energy in the room. Mr. Harrison was nodding approvingly, the other partners were engaged. I was in my element, sharing my vision for the city I loved. Then came the part where I needed to discuss the new timeline and resource allocation. "Clarice," I said, turning to her, "it is my understanding that the new material requisitions are all in process. Is that correct?" I had sent her the finalized list the day before. She stood up holding a tablet. "Actually, Eleanor," she said, her voice ringing with false concern, "I was reviewing your requests last night and I found a number of significant budgetary discrepancies. It seems your cost projections are much higher than what was initially approved." A murmur went through the room. Mr. Harrison's brow furrowed. I stared at her in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The numbers were approved last month." She projected a spreadsheet onto the main screen. It was my budget, but the numbers were all wrong, inflated, and inaccurate. She had altered my document. "As you can see," she continued, addressing the room, "not me, the project is currently trending to be nearly 20% over budget. I do not see how we can proceed without a major reevaluation." Then she delivered the final killing blow, looking directly at Mr. Harrison. "So," she said with a grave tone, "if Eleanor is not comfortable managing a budget of this scale, perhaps we should put someone else in charge of the riverfront project." The room fell silent. Every eye was on me. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had done it. She had publicly accused me of incompetence in front of my boss and all of my colleagues, using falsified data to do it. It was a perfectly executed act of sabotage. I stood there speechless, my mind racing. Anything I said would sound defensive and emotional. I had no proof that she had changed the numbers. She had cornered me completely. I looked at Mr. Harrison's face and saw not anger, but a deep look of concern and disappointment. In that moment, I felt my dream project slipping through my fingers. I felt my reputation, which I had worked so hard to build, crumbling to dust. I was certain that all was lost. That night I went home, and I did not just feel defeated, I felt broken. Clarice had won. She had systematically dismantled my project, my credibility, and my spirit. I sat in my quiet apartment looking out at the glittering lights of the Chicago skyline, the very city I was trying to improve, and I felt like a complete failure. I thought about quitting. I could just walk away, find a job at a different firm, and leave Clarice and her toxic world behind. But then another thought began to smolder in the ashes of my despair. It was the thought of her smug face in that meeting, the calculated cruelty in her eyes. It was the thought of my dream project being handed over to someone else because of her lies. And that thought did not feel like defeat, it felt like fuel. I was not going to run. I was not going to let her win. She wanted to play a game of logistics and communication. Fine, I would play too, but I was going to play to win. I spent the entire weekend not working on the riverfront project, but on a new one, Project Takedown. My first step was to stop thinking emotionally and start thinking strategically. I needed evidence, cold, hard facts that could not be disputed. I opened my laptop and started digging. I went back through months of emails, every single interaction I had with Clarice. I created a spreadsheet of my own. I documented the delayed map request, noting the date I sent it and the date I eventually had to handle it myself. I found the emails where I confirmed the boardroom booking for the donor meeting and her terse reply about the room change. I saved chat logs, I screenshotted calendar invites. A pattern began to emerge, a clear and undeniable pattern of obstruction and what could only be described as willful incompetence. But my own experience was not enough. I needed to show that this was not a personal conflict between me and her, but a systemic problem affecting the entire office. The Reddit post had said others felt the same way, so I decided to find them. I started with Marcus in IT, the one who had first confirmed my feelings about her. I caught him in the break room on Monday morning. "Marcus, can I talk to you for a second?" I asked quietly. I told him what happened in the meeting with Mr. Harrison, how Clarice had altered my budget spreadsheet. His eyes widened. He was not surprised. He told me that Clarice constantly submitted last-minute urgent IT requests for her own pet projects, then complained about the IT department's response time when they could not drop everything to help her. He said he had records of her help desk tickets, many of which were for problems she created herself. He agreed to discreetly pull the logs for me. Next, I went to Sarah in accounting. Sarah was quiet and meticulous, and I knew she did not like confrontation. I explained that I was looking into some budgetary irregularities and asked if she had noticed any issues with Clarice's expense reports or departmental billing. Sarah hesitated at first, but then she leaned in closer. "Her department is a nightmare," she whispered. "She submits incomplete forms, misses deadlines, and then blames accounting for holding up payments to our vendors. We have had 2 suppliers threaten to cut us off because of her." She said she would anonymously forward me the email chains with the angry vendors. My final and most important conversation was with David, a senior project manager like myself. David was a bit of a shark, competitive but fair. I knew he had been having issues on his own high-rise project. I found him working late one evening. "David," I said, getting straight to the point, "Clarice is sabotaging my project. I think she's doing it to you too." He looked up from his blueprints, and for the first time I saw the same exhaustion in his eyes that I felt in my own. He told me a story about how Clarice had failed to book the necessary city permits for a crane delivery, forcing a week-long work stoppage that cost his project tens of thousands of dollars. Her excuse, a clerical error. With each conversation, my dossier grew. I had email chains, IT logs, accounting records, testimony from 3 different departments. It was no longer my word against hers. It was a mountain of evidence that painted a picture of a toxic employee who was actively harming the company's bottom line and morale. The final piece of my plan was to go back to Mr. Harrison. But I was not going to go in complaining or making accusations. I was going to present him with a business case. I spent a full day compiling everything into a single professional report, complete with an executive summary and appendices. I titled it "Logistical Inefficiencies and Their Impact on Project Timelines and Profitability." I never mentioned the word sabotage. I did not have to. The data spoke for itself. I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Harrison for Friday afternoon. I walked into his office feeling not scared but determined. I had done my homework. I was prepared. "Mr. Harrison," he began, "I was very concerned after our last meeting. I am glad you wanted to talk." "I am concerned too, sir," I said, placing the bound report on his desk. "I believe I have identified some systemic issues in our logistical processes that are creating significant bottlenecks and financial risks for the company. I would like you to review my findings." He picked up the report and began to read. I watched his face as he turned the pages. His eyebrows rose. His expression shifted from concern to focus and then to grim hardness. He read every single word, every email, every log. It took him nearly half an hour. When he was finished, he closed the report and looked at me. His eyes were cold as steel. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and even. "You have done the right thing. I will handle this." I did not know what that meant. I had expected a long discussion, maybe a promise to have a talk with Clarice or to implement new oversight procedures. His response was so final, so quick. I left his office feeling a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. I thought at most she would get a stern warning, maybe be moved to a different role with less responsibility. The following week was eerily quiet. Clarice seemed to be avoiding me, which was not unusual, but the whole office felt tense, as if holding its breath. Then on Wednesday afternoon, I saw it. Mr. Harrison and a woman I recognized from the Human Resources Department walked over to Clarice's desk. They spoke to her in low tones. I saw Clarice's face change from her usual smug indifference to shock and then to pale-faced horror. She was shaking her head, talking rapidly, but Mr. Harrison remained stone-faced. A few minutes later, she stood up, grabbed her purse, and was escorted from the office. She did not even get to pack up her desk. Later that day, an email went out to the entire staff announcing that Clarice was no longer with the company. I was stunned. I never expected her to be fired. I had presented a case about logistical problems and inefficiencies, not about a terrible person. But Mr. Harrison had read between the lines. He had seen the truth that I had so carefully documented. He saw that the problem was not the process, it was the person. The feeling was not one of triumphant joy. It was a quiet, solemn victory. I had not set out to destroy someone's career. I had set out to save my own. I had stood up for myself and for my work, and in doing so I had protected my colleagues as well. The next day, a security guard brought a small cardboard box to my desk. It contained the contents of Clarice's office supplies. It seemed Human Resources had asked Mr. Harrison who should sort through her things, and he had suggested me. As I packed away her pens and notepads, I felt a strange sense of closure. The new logistics coordinator, a man named Ben, started a month later. He was cheerful, efficient, and incredibly good at his job. Suddenly, supplies arrived on time, rooms were booked correctly, and projects moved forward smoothly. The entire atmosphere in the office changed. It was like a cloud had lifted. People were smiling more, collaborating more. My riverfront project was back on track, and with the newfound efficiency, we quickly made up for lost time. Mr. Harrison called me into his office about a month after Clarice was gone. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing for me to sit down, "I want to apologize. I should have seen what was happening sooner." "No, sir," I replied. "It was a difficult situation." He leaned forward. "I want to tell you something. I knew Clarice was a problem from her first month here. We had received minor complaints, but our hands were tied by company policy and labor laws. It is very difficult to terminate an employee for having a bad attitude or for making what can be argued are honest mistakes. We needed a well-documented business case demonstrating a clear pattern of behavior that negatively impacted the company's financials." He paused and looked me straight in the eye. "You gave us that case, Eleanor. You did the hard work that Human Resources needed to act decisively. You did not just come to me with complaints, you came with data. You saved your project, but you also solved a much larger problem for this entire firm. That was the twist I had never seen coming. I thought I was a lone vigilante fighting a secret war. It turned out my boss was waiting for a champion, someone with the courage and diligence to build the case he could not. My actions were not just about revenge, they were about justice, and they had enabled the leadership to do what was right. My new normal was better than my old one. I had my dream project and it was thriving, but I had also learned something about myself. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that when pushed into a corner, I would not break, I would fight back with intelligence and strategy. My love for Chicago and my work was deeper now because I had fought for it. The Riverfront Revitalization Project broke ground that summer and it was a huge success. The park is there today, a beautiful green space filled with families and laughter, a testament to what is possible when you refuse to let negativity and obstruction stand in your way. And sometimes when I walk along the river path, I think of Clarice and I feel a small measure of pity for her. She had so much potential to help build things up, but she chose to dedicate her energy to tearing them down. In the end, the only thing she managed to tear down was herself, and that was the most poetic consequence of all.